All right, so in this video, we're going to cover topic one, the Civil War. This is a review video for your final exam. It's just to ensure that all the information that you're going to need for the exam is here and available to you in case you forgot, you can't find it in a textbook, the homework, the notes, things along those lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through first the vocabulary. If you look on your hard copy study guide sheet, you should be able to find all the vocabulary first and foremost in the section. You can also obviously do it online as the sheet, the review sheet is posted on Google Classroom for you as well. So I'm just going to kind of go through these, pick our way through so it kind of makes some level of sense. So first and foremost, when we talk about the Civil War, some terms that we need to be aware of, number one, for example, would be a siege. A siege is a military blockade of a port or a city in order to force a surrender. So you think of it like a castle, right? You've got your big castle, you've got the moat, you've got the tall walls. And so it's really hard to attack a castle, right? Like getting the guys across the moat, up the walls, like that's really hard to do. So a way that you can kind of still gain a victory without fighting directly is to just cut the castle off. Don't allow any fresh water in. Don't allow any fresh food in. And that way you slowly starve these people out. So by blockading this port or this city, what you're doing is you're depriving them of food and water, and then eventually they will have to surrender. That's the idea. So it's a way of preventing a frontal assault that's going to cost many lives. This is going to be a key part of the Union strategy, and we'll go over that in just a minute. Another word you want to keep in mind is attrition. Attrition means to wear down by constant attack. And the idea is here is that you're taking a beating over and over and over, and it just kind of wears you down over time. The best analogy I can think of is if you're watching a football game, they talk about the running game, right? And the idea is that in the first quarter, you've run it a bunch of times and you haven't made a lot of progress. In the second quarter, you run a bunch of times and haven't made a lot of progress. And the third quarter, you run it a bunch of times and you made a little bit of progress, but not a whole lot. By the time you get to the fourth quarter, you typically see some success because the idea is for the first three quarters, you've been hitting the wall. The offensive lines have been pushing people around, and it wears you down. You just get exhausted. So when we talk about the term of attrition, we mean wearing them down by constant attack. Whether it be running out of weapons and ammunition or food or whatever. It's just constantly wearing the enemy down. Emancipation is the freeing from someone from slavery. So to emancipate somebody is to free them from slavery. That usually is shown with Emancipation Proclamation, which is another term we'll be here in a minute. President Abraham Lincoln, he was president during the Civil War. Let's not forget he got elected, and then South Carolina started to secede, and other southern states started to secede as well. While he was president, he did suspend habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is like the right to know why you're in jail. So basically, if you were a U.S. citizen and you said some really nice things about the Confederacy at the time, he would put you in jail if you were in a northern city, because he looked at it and says, as I need to protect the country as a whole, and if I need to do that by taking some rights away, then that's what I'm going to do. So his goal here is to keep the Union together. He did free some slaves, not all of them. He is instrumental in the passage of the 13th Amendment, which does liberate all the slaves eventually. But again, that's a constitutional amendment and not a presidential action. So just be aware that this is a guy who held the Union together through really crafty, a lot of cunning, a lot of cleverness. So just kind of have that in the back of your head. Another guy is Frederick Douglass. He's a prominent African-American abolitionist. Remember, abolitionists want to abolish slavery. They want to get rid of slavery. He is a former slave. He escaped slavery in Maryland and made his way north. And he believed that African-Americans were equal to rights. He believed African-Americans were equal to white people at the time. And his thought process of the way to show that would be by having African-Americans serve in the military. And that would overcome the prejudice that is held by a lot of people against African Americans at this time. Prejudice, if you break down the word, anytime you say pre, it's before. Like the prefix, the pregame, the preamble, it's before. Pre means before. But anytime you say J-U-D, that's like justice, judging, jury, it's determination. So the idea here is that when someone's prejudiced, it means they've made up their minds before they've met the person. So if you look at somebody and based on what they're wearing, based on the color of their skin, based on you just sizing them up momentarily, it's prejudice, right? You're basically determining, you're judging them before you've had a chance to really meet them. And so that's the idea here, is that Frederick Douglass wanted to help African Americans overcome prejudice because he believed that if African Americans were known to white Americans and what they were capable of, that progress could be made. Another guy here is Charles Sumner. He's a radical Republican senator from Massachusetts, right? Homegrown guy from Massachusetts. He opposed Andrew Johnson's lenient plan of Reconstruction. Charles Sumner, as a radical Republican, he's one of the guys that believed the South needed to really be punished. Lincoln thought the South should be brought back into the Union as quickly as possible and, accept the Civil War happens, that changes are going to be made, and we kind of move forward. He obviously was assassinated before that could happen. Andrew Johnson wasn't really looking to punish the South all that much, if at all, based on the Johnson plan. Charles Sumner, he's this radical Republican senator who really wanted to punish the South. His argument was the South started the Civil War, the South should be harmed so they can never start the Civil War again. And the thought process was, if you can shift political power away from the white Southerners towards these newly freed slaves, these freedmen, these African Americans, that really could go a long ways in preventing any kind of Civil War nonsense down the line. So he's a radical Republican from Massachusetts who really wants to punish the South. Ulysses S. Grant, meanwhile, he is a Civil War general. He later becomes president of the United States during Reconstruction. Ulysses S. Grant is probably the best general the United States had, the Union had during this time. What he would do is he looked at the war and saw the advantages the North had, and so he used a strategy of attrition. And what that means is that, for months, he would constantly attack and wear down the Southern Army. So when Ulysses S. Grant was in charge of the Army of the Potomac in the East, he would attack Robert E. Lee, who was the general in the South, and it would just be a constant attack, even if it was low level, just nonstop. And the idea was that the North had more men, North had more guns, the North had more bullets, the North had more weapons. And so, after every battle, every bullet that's fired, the North can replenish it and then some, and the South couldn't. And so it just wore the enemy down. So Ulysses S. Grant kind of realized that kind of war is what was necessary, that you needed to have this battle of attrition to wear the enemy down by constant attacks. And that's really how he ends up getting the South to surrender, getting Robert E. Lee to surrender. John Brown is going to be another radical abolitionist. So much like Frederick Douglass, he wants to abolish slavery. Ultimately, he's executed for his uprising at Harper's Ferry. The gist of it is he takes over a federal arsenal where they store all the weapons, and he wants to distribute those weapons to slaves and then have the slaves rise up and basically fight for their freedom. It doesn't happen, but it really shows you the difference attitudes the North and the South have. The South view this guy as a terrorist. They view him as the devil incarnate because he is playing on their deepest fears, which is armed slaves rising up against them and killing them in the night. Whereas in the North, he's not viewed as a terrorist. He's viewed as like a martyr, like a guy who had the right ideas, but maybe went a little too far. People feel bad for him. And they really, they like what he was about, not necessarily the way he went about it, if that makes sense. And so the idea that your country is seeing John Brown in two very different ways. One person view him as a terrorist, other people view him as a freedom fighter. That's indicative of how deep the division is between North and South. The Emancipation Proclamation, this is going to change the focus of the war. So this is kind of one of those cool things where when Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, understand what it does. It frees slaves that are in the states of rebellion that are currently under the South's control. So basically, Lincoln has no power to free the slaves in southern states that are under the Confederate control. It's me saying that, okay, all women in Afghanistan can now go to school. I've got no power to enforce that. I can't do it. But what it does is it basically makes the war about slavery. It transitions the war to be a war about states' rights, or the South want to be free from the North, etc., to a war about slavery. And what this effectively does is eliminates any help that the South could get. So the Southerners had asked for help from France and England and other European countries, which were happy to do it. England and France weren't a huge fan of slavery, but they did want to see the U.S. taken down a peg. But now with the Emancipation Proclamation, it became clear that the United States is fighting to end slavery and keep the Union together. And if you're France and England, you can back the Confederacy if they want quote unquote freedom, but you can't back them if they're fighting for slavery, which this kind of puts them in that box. So the Emancipation Proclamation changed the war's focus from preserving the Union to really ending slavery. It did free all slaves in the states that were in rebellion in those areas that were not under President Lincoln's control, and the Army is going to enforce it. So it's a huge step. It's more of a it's a not a practical step per se, but it's a big step to get the issue of slavery on the docket to really be resolved permanently. Early in the war, the Union and Confederacy avoided holding on to large numbers of prisoners by agreeing to formal prisoner exchanges. So the idea is that they would exchange prisoners back and forth. So you capture 2,000 Union prisoners if you're the South, you exchange them for 2,000 Northern prisoners. And this was a normal habit because the idea is that these are guys who could then get thrown back in circulation. So if you did a prisoner exchange, the North has 2,000 soldiers, the South has 2,000 soldiers, and then you flip them. As the war goes on, the North does that less and less. The thought process being, the South has a smaller population. So every time you give them their prisoners back, their guys that you captured back, they're getting soldiers back to fight. Whereas in the North, you can replace the soldiers that are captured. The North has a huge population compared to the South. So, the South really needs those guys back, whereas the North doesn't. And so it's an advantage for the North. Gettysburg is going to be a major battle that's considered a turning point for the Civil War. It stopped Robert E. Lee's advance into the North at Pennsylvania. So Gettysburg is this really pretty substantial win. Really, it forces the Confederates back. A lot of casualties. It kind of shatters this myth of invulnerability or invincibility that Southern Army really had. And it was the best chance to really kind of force the North to contend with the war, because up until this point, most of the battles were taking place in the South. And so Gettysburg really kind of pushed the Southerners back. It shattered Lee's reputation for invincibility and really is viewed as a turning point in the war. At the same time, the Battle of Vicksburg is another turning point in the war because Vicksburg was the fortress that controlled the Mississippi River. And the whole strategy of the North was you cut the Confederacy in two. The Mississippi River is a big river. It's used as a highway. If the Union can control the Mississippi River, then it can split Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas and all the food that they grow from the rest of the South. And Vicksburg was the major city that connected those two sides together. So after a siege, Ulysses S. Grant is able to capture Vicksburg, and that really cuts the Union into two pieces. And from that point onward, Arkansas and Texas and Louisiana are basically out of the war. There's nothing they can do. So yeah, guys are there willing to fight, but they just can't get to the fight because you've effectively cut the Confederacy in half by controlling the entirety of the Mississippi River. Andersonville is a terrible prison in Georgia in particular. It was basically an open air camp with no shade or shelter for its thousands of men that were there. Disease, malnutrition was rampant. So again, it just speaks to the difficulty the South had to feeding its soldiers. It talks about how terrible war is. So Andersonville is a really horrible prison that was maintained by the Confederacy, where Northern prisoners were kept. Okay. Section 2 here of the study guide, we talk about primary sources. So this one is done for you, and it's done for you on the study guide, hard copy study guide in front of you. What this is it's a primary source, and reading at the top there, it's an excerpt from an 1850 speech by United States Senator Solomon Wethersby Downs. The speech was delivered on the floor of the Senate in response to a proposal by Senator Henry Clay, a proposal that ultimately contributed to the Compromise of 1850. So we're talking pre-Civil War here. The issue of slavery is very much at the forefront, as it is, after 1850 or 1850 or later. So what I want you guys to think about is the context. Read the document so you can summarize it, and then think about the perspective. What is this person's point of view? So the context is kind of given in the source, right? We're talking about what to do about slavery. That's part of the Compromise of 1850. We're getting real close to the Civil War. So slavery is a national issue, and the North and South are on very different sides of slavery. The North largely does not like it. Many people want to abolish it immediately, whereas in the South, they view it as a necessary evil, a part of their life that they have to hold on to. So when we say context, that's all we're talking about. What's going on at the time this thing was made. Now, if we're going to talk about summary, we have to read the document and see uh, what exactly is contained here, right? What is going on here? What does the document say? So if we read it, it says, "Sir, I call upon the opponents of this system to prove that even the white laboring classes of the North, I say nothing of the blacks there, are as happy or as contented or as comfortably situated as the blacks in the South. Sir, the slaves in the South do not suffer 1/10 part of the evils the white laborers in the North do. Poverty is unknown to the Southern slave, for as soon as the master of his slaves becomes too poor to provide for them, he sells them to others who can take care of them. This, sir, is one of the excellencies of the system of slavery, but that the slave never experiences the pinching wants of poverty." It's kind of messed up when you think about it. So, a few things here. He's talking, when he says opponents of this system, we're talking about slavery, right? We're talking about the system of slavery. That's the issue. That's what's happening here. And he kind of makes, to summarize it, that's what he mentions. He goes on, he compares slaves in the South to the folks that work in the factories in the North, right? And he says the slaves in the South are better off than the people working in the North, in those factories in the North, because while the factory workers in the North, many of them are poor, in the South, slaves are never poor because the moment their master or owner is poor, he sells off the slave. Pretty messed up thought process there, because it associates the owner's wealth with the well-being of the slave, which isn't a direct correlation there. Um, think of it in terms of, if someone is very, very wealthy, how much money are they going to spend maintaining their slave quarters and housing and um, clothing and things along those lines? Probably not that much. So for me, I would disregard this. If we take a look at the bottom, we look at the additional facts. All right, the Constitution banned the slave trade after 1808. Downs is a slaveholder, which makes sense because here's a guy who's advocating for slavery. He says the system of slavery is pretty good, and it's better to be a slave down south than it is a free person working in a factory up north, which is, again, pretty messed up. But it makes sense because he himself was a slaveholder, and you look at number 4 down there, Downs represented Louisiana, where most voters were pro-slavery. So the idea here is that these are two facts that will be very helpful to know. Two facts would be very helpful to understand, to put this thing in better perspective, to show bias. So when we talk about the perspective, we're looking at this and recognizing, hey, this dude owned slaves. He represented Louisiana, a state where voters were pro-slavery. Um, and so that would be why he is going to be, his perspective on the issue of slavery is a positive one. He views slavery as positive. All right, let's take a look at this one. This is, if we look at the source, we look at Robert E. Lee, a letter to his sister, April 1861. So, what is the context for this primary source? Here's the things that we got to know. Number one, it's a letter from Robert E. Lee to his sister shortly after the outbreak of the Civil War. So, the context there is it's a letter to his sister shortly after the Civil War is breaking out. So, there's a few things that we can glean from this. Number one, it's a letter to his sister, a family member. So think about what he's going to say in that letter. Not just like, "Oh, I love you, sister. I hope everything's well," yada, yada. But he's going to be pretty open and honest, right? This is going to be a close relationship. It's a familial relationship. He's not going to, what he says here is going to be kept secret. He's setting in trust. Think about the conversations you have with your best friend versus the conversations you would have with a teacher or with someone who is not your best friend. So, someone you trust, you speak more openly to. So, the context we got to be aware of here, things we want to keep in mind is, again, number one, it's right after the Civil War breaks. Robert E. Lee is going to be a leader of the Southern armies, and this is a letter to his sister. So let's take a look at the summary. What do we need to know about that? He says the whole South is in a state of revolution into which Virginia, after a long struggle, has been drawn. And though I would have pleaded to end for redress of grievances, real or supposed, yet in my own person I had to meet the question whether I should take part against my native state. The redress of grievances just means a long list of complaints. So he's basically saying, he wanted these complaints to be addressed in some way, nonviolent way, and now he's got the problem because Virginia is seceding. Virginia's leaving the Union, and he's got to make a decision. Does he stay in the Union Army and then fight against his home state? Or does he leave the Union Army and fight with his home state, right? Does he go and join Virginia in the secession? He continues on, with all my devotion to the Union and feeling of loyalty and duty of an American citizen, I have not been able to make up my mind to raise my hand against my relatives, my children, my home. Again, his relatives, his children, his home are all in Virginia. So he cannot raise arms against his relatives, his kids, and his home in Virginia. He can't do it. He says, I have therefore resigned, which means to voluntarily leave the Army, in save and defense of my native state, with the sincere hope that my poor services will never be needed. So he's hoping he doesn't have to fight. I hope I may never be called upon to draw my sword. I know you will blame me, but you must think as kindly as you can and believe that I have endeavored to do what I thought was right. So the summary here is that Robert E. Lee is torn. He's made the decision to join Virginia, join the South, but it was a difficult decision for him to make. That's the idea. It was a difficult decision for him to make. And then, as far as perspective goes, he is someone who is from Virginia, believes strongly in Virginia. And the idea is that, his loyalty is to Virginia first and the United States second. So he's going to go and join Virginia to fight against the Union. So, context for the primary source: right before the outbreak of the Civil War, he's writing to his sister, kind of keep those things in mind. Summary: he's torn about what he should do. He finally makes up his mind, but he's not loving it. It's a really hard decision for him to make because he has to leave his job, his career in the U.S. Army, and then join up Virginia. And he's only doing it because he can't imagine. He can't fight his relatives. He can't fight against his kids. He can't fight against his home. Okay, and then the last part are the big picture questions. So these big picture questions, some of these will be the open response, and you're going to have to pick 2 of 7. So we're just going to walk through some of these big picture questions, have an understanding of what they're all about, so you know what to write about. Big picture question number 1 is, what advantages did the Union have over the Confederacy? What advantages did the Confederacy have over the Union? And then how do the Union's advantages appear on the battlefield over the course of the war? So there's really 3 questions here. So if you do the open response, think 3 sentences, 1 sentence per question. So what advantages does the North have? Does the Union have? Well, you can see it right here. Greater industry. So they have more factories, meaning they can produce more stuff. So yeah, that's boots, that's uniforms, that's buttons, that's guns, that's bullets, that's ships, right? So they can build a heck of a lot more. It's also railroads. They can lay railroad track and build more railroads, and as a result, they have better transportation. The more railroad track the North has, the further it can move its men, the faster it can move its men, and that's a really big deal, right? Because you figure at this time, guys are either walking, they're on horseback, or they're taking a train. And so if you can get guys from point A to point B via train versus the guys that are on foot, you can outmaneuver them, get past them, avoid the fight, cause the fight, whatever you want to do. You in complete control. The North has a much bigger army. They've just got more people. There's way, way, way more people. The North has an established government that's recognized by foreign powers. They have laws in place. They don't have to change their government. No one has to get used to anything new, right? That system is in place. They certainly have more money. And they have the capacity for food. The North has a lot of farmland to grow food, to feed its army, to feed its people. So that's what the North has. What advantage does the Confederacy have? Number 1, they've got some really skilled officers. The North had some too, but a lot of the really bright officers were from the South. So whether it be Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Beauregard, like the Southern guys were very skilled officers. They were very good in the battlefield. Keep in mind that while the North has to attack and conquer the South just needs to survive. If the South can just survive for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, the North will eventually give up, right? So the North has to really conquer the South, whereas the South just has to not lose. They're fighting on their home turf, home field advantage. Most of the fighting is done in the South, meaning they're closer to their support base, closer to friendly personnel. They have the terrain advantage. They know the lay of the land. So just kind of have that stuff in mind. How do the Union's advantages appear on the battlefield over the course of the war? Well, that's pretty simple. These skilled officers eventually they're going to be knocked out of action. They are killed. They get too old and retire, whatever happens. So these skilled officers get knocked off one at a time, right? However, bigger army, that's not going anywhere, right? Better transportation, those things don't go anywhere. So the North's advantages are kind of built in, they're entrenched, whereas the South's advantages, the spirit and motivation to fight, yeah, early on, but then as the war drags on, people are running short on food and the war is taking place in their backyard and their house is being taken by the North. So like the spirit of motivation fades over time. That home field advantage, like that's a positive, but at the same time, you're fighting guys. Most of the fighting is done in the South. So, after a couple of months of marching around, the Northerners know the lay of the land too. Like they've surveyed it. They know where the rivers are, the bridges are, and they get it. And let's not forget, the maps at this time were fairly accurate and both sides had them. So a lot of these advantages disappear over time for the South, whereas for the North, they just get stronger. So the North is able to start making up more guns than the South, and by the end of the war, they're producing several times the number of guns the South can produce. They're sending several times more men into the war than the South can. And so those are the things that kind of cause it to tilt into the North's favor. Big question number 2, what was the Northern strategy? How could this lead to the Confederacy's defeat? So again, a 2-sentence response would be okay here if you'd write well. So keep in mind this, the Northern war strategy was to kind of surround and cut off the South. So it was a blockade. And the idea behind a blockade was that you don't let any ships get into the South to bring food and guns and weapons and ammunition because the South doesn't have a lot of that. What the South is primarily growing is cotton. And while cotton is, a great moneymaker, you can't really fight a war with cotton. The North is making guns. The South makes cotton. Which one's going to be more impressive? So what happens here is the North is going to try and blockade the South. We're also going to try and cut the South into pieces. So you can see along here, I can use my little turn on the pen. You can see this is the Mississippi River down here. And you can see you've got the Battle of Vicksburg right here, Fort Henry and Donelson as well. This is going to cut the Confederacy into two. So you have Arkansas and Louisiana on one side, along with Texas, where a lot of the food comes from, and it's completely cut off from the other side. So what the North is trying to do here is really isolate, cut off, and defeat in peace the South. So one, cut off the South from the rest of the world via this naval blockade. That's going to deprive the South of a lot of war materials it needs, a lot of food that it needs. Step 2, cut the South in half using the Mississippi River. And that's going to cut off the South from its remaining food supplies. Okay? Then you're going to see guys like William Tecumseh Sherman really cut through to Savannah, Georgia, which cuts the South into another component. And so what these things do is it really eliminates the South bit by bit by bit. So now instead of the South being able to support it in different ways, so in other words, let's say Alabama managed to grow a little extra food. In the early stages of the war, they could send that up to Virginia. Now they can't because they're cut off. And so what you're doing, you're isolating these different regions bit by bit by bit. So think about eating a steak. You don't just eat the giant steak, you cut it up into pieces. And that's the idea. So what was the Northern War strategy? To isolate the South. First, from the rest of the world to prevent trade. Secondly, to break it up into its component parts. So isolate it via the Mississippi River, cut through Georgia, break it up again. And how would this lead to the Confederacy's defeat? It would prevent the Confederacy from being able to grow the food, to manufacture the weapons, to basically get their hands on the resources to continue fighting. Because with this war, which is a battle of attrition, a war of attrition, the North is going to grind the South down because the North has these advantages and the South can't keep up. And so if you keep breaking the South into smaller and smaller pieces where they can't support one another, eventually the South will simply be destroyed. And the last big question here, how did the issue of slavery evolve over time? In other words, why did Lincoln have to wait years before issuing the Emancipation Proclamation? Why didn't he do it when he first was elected president? When Lincoln was first elected president, this map is what you see of the Union. The blue states are all no slavery states. Slavery is not allowed. The yellow states are states where slavery is allowed, but they stayed with the Union. And then the red states are obviously states that seceded, the light and the dark red. If Lincoln said that slavery was illegal, if he immediately made it illegal or tried to, those yellow states would be firmly in the South. They would have seceded. They would have joined the Confederacy. And so I don't know if you guys remember it, but Washington, D.C. is like right here. So that means the capital of your country would be deep behind enemy lines. We're talking a couple hundred miles behind enemy lines. He can't do it. If Lincoln declares slavery to be illegal the moment the Civil War starts, the South wins the war. The North wouldn't be able to keep up. It wouldn't be successful. Like, I don't know how it would have ended necessarily, but the point is that if Missouri and Kentucky and Maryland and Delaware and, oh, by the way, your capital are all in the Confederacy, I'm not sure the North is able to win that war. Maybe over a long enough timeline, but they'd just give up. It'd be too difficult. So the idea here is that Lincoln can't do it. He needs to make the war about maintaining the Union. So when he first gets elected, he's like, listen, slavery is, we're going to leave it alone. We're focusing on maintaining the Union. In Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, and Maryland, while they have slavery being legal, they support the Union. They don't think there should be secession over it. So Lincoln doesn't give them a reason to leave. He says, we're not touching slavery. We're maintaining the Union. And so Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland, those yellow states, stay with the Union. But as time goes on, right, as time goes on, the anti-slavery guys in those states start to get more power. They start to take more control. And so the war starts to shift more in the North's favor. So as it looks more and more like the North is going to win, Lincoln can take further steps, right? He can start taking steps like the Emancipation Proclamation. If you're Kentucky or Missouri and the North is winning the war, why would you switch sides? You know what I mean? Like, why would you, in the middle of a war, why would you switch to the losing team? So the Emancipation Proclamation, when issued, yeah, people in Kentucky and Missouri and Maryland and Delaware, they might be upset, but the North is winning the war. So are they upset enough to switch sides? No, they're not. And let's be clear, the Emancipation Proclamation, it only frees slaves in territories that are under the Confederacy's control. So if you were a slave in any of those yellow states, the Emancipation Proclamation does not apply to you. So it's another reason why Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware are, they can see the way this thing is going, but they're not going to rebel. They're not going to switch sides because legally the slaves in their states are still slaves. Lincoln doesn't free them. And so the point here is, as the war continues on and the North gains more and more of an advantage, Lincoln is able to push the slavery issue a little bit further as time goes on. So when the war begins, he has to make it all about preserving the Union, because if he makes it about slavery, states are going to join the South and he'll lose the war. But a few years in, it's clear that the North is getting the upper hand. So he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which again only affects the red states who are already rebelling against him. So who cares what they think? It doesn't affect the yellow states. And then by the time we get to really the end of the war with the 13th Amendment, by that point in time, the Confederacy is done. Everybody knows it. It's just a matter of time. So when the 13th Amendment gets passed, or support for it is there, everyone's fully aware the Confederacy is about to surrender in the coming weeks or months, and that the slavery issue is being put to bed. Because at this point, you have African American people in government, you have African American soldiers who are armed, fighting, and it is seen more and more as, well, this is the inevitability of it. So why didn't he do it when he first was elected? Lincoln couldn't free the slaves because he would have lost the war. But by the time the war is over, the North is in a situation where they can really dictate that slavery should be abandoned, should be forbidden, so that the Civil War never happens again. And that's the real reason, right? If you don't eliminate slavery, this war will happen again. So to prevent this Civil War from happening ever again, you ban slavery, and that's that. Okay, so this is the end of topic number one, Civil War. What we have gone through are all your big picture questions. We've gone through all the primary sources that are there, and we've gone through all the vocabulary. Remember, for your final exam, all of these vocabulary terms are on your final. They're all multiple choice or matching, so they're all there. So know what these terms are. As far as the primary sources go, most of these primary sources are on your exam. So I can't tell you if these two definitely are, or maybe one of the two is, but as we go through this final exam review guide, the overwhelming majority of these documents are on the final exam. So if you know what the context is, if you know the summary, if you know the perspective, you're going to be great. You're going to be awesome at them. So just be aware of that. And then as far as the big picture questions, remember, I'm giving you 7 questions. You have to pick 2. There's at least one big picture question per topic on the final exam. So if you can answer these 3 big picture questions about the Civil War and do the same for, say, the next topic when it comes to Reconstruction, then that's it. You are all set with big picture questions because you know there's going to be at least one Civil War question and one Reconstruction question. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, ask in class. But hopefully this helps you kind of put everything together.